small town Redditors, what's the weirdest unsolved crime in your town, old or new? About 30 octoseconds ago, a refuse worker found the badly burned body of an 18-month-old boy amongst the bags and recycling. Forensics deduced that due to the condition of his liver he died less than a week before his body was found. Hospital and medical records were used to establish that nobody in the county was missing a child. He doesn't have a name on his gravestone. It was in Cumbria, England. The police likely didn't retain a DNA sample, or we might have heard something about familial DNA by now. The local police aren't very good. Look up the case of Poppy Worthington as an example. Most local people assume he died of SIDS, then his parents panicked and tried to conceal his body. Whoever did it must have had an element of local knowledge in order to know where to put the corpse. There is a street in my city called Park Avenue. It's a very small city, mostly blue-collar. In 2005, a newborn baby boy was found dead near a factory on Park Avenue. Doctors could tell he was born alive and likely lived for a few hours before he died. I don't know if he was abandoned, left to die, or killed in some way. That info was never released. Police made a statement saying, "Please come forward. We want to help you bury this child properly." The mother sent an anonymous letter to the police station 2 weeks later, and said she would come to the station soon. The letter didn't explain the circumstances, but it did say she was afraid. She never came forward. The baby was named Baby Parker and money was raised to give him a proper burial. People still leave gifts at his grave. About 15 years ago, a town near where I grew up drained a man-made lake that was used for recreational swimming. This particular year they decided to drain the whole thing to do a clean-up. They discovered an intact skeleton that had been sitting at the bottom of the lake for something like 50 years based on the class ring that was still on the skeleton. From my understanding, this person had never been reported missing or anything. This has happened a number of times in the Boston area. Young able-bodied people, mostly men, disappear from bars or clubs and are eventually found in the harbor, the river or another body of water. There's a lot of crazy conspiracy theories and talk of a serial killer, but it seems to be just a combination of alcohol, the dark and an unfamiliarity with the area. They make a string of poor choices, wind up too close to the water, then fall in and drown when there's nobody around to notice. Yup, and Tyler Davis, who went missing in the Easton area in February 2019. Both possibly inebriated men that went missing from very popular central Ohio areas. Also Joey Labute, who was last seen alive at Union Cafe, but his body was actually found. Unlike the other two, those three stick out the most. But there are a few other cases of young men that have gone missing after drinking in Columbus. There's nothing that links the cases to suggest a serial killer, but it's still strange that this many similar cases happen in a mid-tier city comparatively. I hadn't heard about Pittsburgh having a series of similar cases, but that's interesting. Upsetting and sad. Interesting. Just the fact that they are all leaving drinking establishments late at night points towards the more likely scenario that they were drunk, confused, and then passing out and succumbing to the elements. But then there's other details that don't add up, and to add to the mystery, their bodies haven't been found even after many searches in already very populated and always developing parts of the city. Something like this happened in my hometown. They found his body in the river a while later. There were security cameras that showed him walking in the general direction of a bridge, and a few drivers saw him walking the car part of the bridge. They determined he probably fell in the river trying to jump from the car part of the bridge to the pedestrian part. There's a 3-5-foot gap, and apparently the gap is not obvious. In my hometown there was a rich family who were rumored to have gotten their gains during WIA by working with the Japanese forces. They had large estates, mansions, and were just ridiculously rich. One day the entire family disappeared, and their houses and most of their properties were either burned down, destroyed, or missing. No one knows where they went to or if they are even alive. The most likely explanation was that they lost a lot of favors and money, so they either run away or killed themselves deep in the mountains. They also left large amounts of land which were then given to either their previous owners or new owners. No other family member has returned, and this was about 30 years ago when it happened. A family of about 20, and they just disappeared overnight. Ed had something like that in my hometown, only like way smaller scale. There was these abandoned trailers at the end of the dirt road past the cemetery. We used to root around in them because it was spooky and they were decrepit, so it made for a thrilling night. Small town living, am I right? Anyway, I went during the day to look around and noticed a bunch of bills on the table dated in the 70s, same with a bunch of uncashed checks. The fridge still had very gnarly groceries from the 70s, including sodas and things like that. Cabinets had items in it like cleaning supplies, etc. Closets were full with clothes, beds made, etc. It was like a snapshot in time from the 70s. I still do not know what happened to his family, or why they just up and left. Okay, what would they do with the bones and flesh? Did the factory use light or something that could dissolve the flesh and bones? There is a documentary about a guy who was upper management at a plastics factory who murdered an illegal immigrant he had gotten pregnant. He put her body in a 55-gallon drum in some kind of dye or something and stored it all in his basement for 30 years or some such while raising a family there. Curious what he told his children. Wife was in the drum. Eventually he sold the place and left it there. The new owner put it out for removal, but at around £300, the garbage company refused to remove it. So the guy looked and found the body. They were able to solve the crime as the killer put the girl's address book in the drum and it was still readable. Further, the number of her best friend was still her best friend's number and she was the last person to see the girl before she disappeared, going to meet the man who had promised to marry her. Just imagine if the garbage truck had just removed the drum. Back in 2001, a friend of my friend had been secretly chatting online with a guy from Canada. They had made plans to meet up in Windsor or Detroit. A few days later, her body was found dumped in the woods. After doing some digging, police got a hold of the Canadian guy. He said he went to meet her, but she never showed. So he assumed she had stood him up. His story checked out. One suspect was this co-worker, but a few months later he did a murder-suicide to his mom, so they could never get the truth out of him. It's been a cold case ever since. Edit, this was her co-worker, not Canada guys. She would have traveled 7-8 hours to meet the guy in Detroit, Windsor, assuming she even made it out of town. Late 90s. A natural gas compressor station was built next door to me. Entire neighborhood protested it hard, but we were just dumb farmers, and gas companies have money. Shortly after it was built, in the middle of the night, it sprung a leak. Compressed gas spewed into the air like a geyser and there was now a jet black cloud next door. Not that I could see much anyway at that tower. The sound it made was so loud, it would make a foghorn sound like a squeaky toy. Anyway, we evacuated to the other side of town to some family and watched the news. Apparently it ended quickly enough. They estimated $13 million worth of natural gas was shot into the environment. So we go back. Reporters talk to my dad and stuff. Then two men show up, hand something to each news company, and everyone leaves immediately. My family and my neighbors are standing there like WTF. Where did the reporters go? Within the hour, it was no longer on the news. If you Google it, you'll find no trace of it. They just made that story disappear. Pretty recent, January this year. I'm in a village so it's even smaller. I live right next to a river, and one day after rain my grandpa went searching for snails, but he found a head still with some flesh. A neighbor had also found an arm around the same time. The police were called. They found the body and a few dogs chewing on it, but it was in a bag hanging from a tree above the river. At first it was assumed it was from the big city thrown into the river, but no, it's hanging from the damn tree. The weirdest thing is that the woman was not from the village itself. When I was a teenager, there was a spate of rude graffiti in my quiet, boring town of under 30,000 people. It was all obviously being done by the same person, as all the penises were drawn in a very unique style and they were all signed Frisbee. with the Z's written in a distinctive way. There didn't seem to be any pattern of where they would strike either. Every week or so, a new one would appear. On the wall outside the social club, in the highway underpass, inside the fish and chip shop toilet, etc. It got to a point where kids at school would keep track of where the latest frisbee had appeared, and it would be all anyone could talk about. In a way, they were the proto-Banksy. Everyone wanted to know their true identity, including the police. Since our town had practically no crime other than the odd stolen bicycle, the cops had the time and resources to come down hard on this one. It was, and still is, a solidly conservative town, so no doubt they were under pressure too from the local council to quickly address this shocking moral depravity and prevent the appearance of further enormous, stylized, ejaculating cocks around town. They went around the schools, including the elementary, primaries, and interviewed bunches of kids looking for any clues that might lead them to the mysterious frisbee. Supposedly, they checked the school registration books and paid particular attention to any kid who had a name that might reasonably lead to a nickname of Frisbee. And we all swore that we saw more police cars driving around than usual that summer, looking to catch the mystery artist in the act. As far as I know, they never did get him or her. The graffiti just stopped appearing as suddenly as it started. Nor did we kids ever find out who it was. There were tons of theories, of course, with a lot of suspicion falling on a kid called Charlie in the year above me because apparently, he liked to doodle dicks and balls on his notebooks. However, he was subsequently cleared by some girl called Debbie who sat next to him in French, and she sneaked a peek at his doodles one day and she reported that the vein structure running down Charlie's shaft was intrinsically different from that of Frisbee's and therefore not a match. Doctor. Someone went around town drawing massive schlongs. Police spared no expense trying to catch the perpetrator but never did. Yes, my family is from the small town where a prominent cult founder was born, a town of about 1,000. Back 25-30 years ago, my uncle was on city council when the cult came to town and offered boatloads of money to build a shrine and improve infrastructure. They didn't have the bad reputation at that point quite yet that they do now. The majority of city council was drooling over the cash. But my uncle 12 angry men at the situation, seeing the writing on the wall that this was a step off a cliff to becoming overrun. One of the people he never convinced was the sheriff, but he still got his numbers. Unfortunately, he would receive harassing phone calls every night and would frequently have cars parked outside his house at odd hours. Everyone knows everyone, population 1,000, remember. And these were not locals. It came to a head when his house got broken into and letters were left threatening my aunt and cousins, who were young children at the time. Cities got involved, and the behavior immediately stopped. A few days later the cultists packed up and left. Officially, the threats and break-in were never solved, though every once in a while they would still get odd phone calls and blank letters in the mail. Yay, anthrax scare. It's not really unsolved but definitely a weird one. There was a row of terraced houses next to the church. The one closest was occupied by two women, a mother and daughter, both who had some mental incapacities. They basically only left the house to walk to the supermarket. As the mother got older, only the daughter went out. Eventually, no one was leaving the house. The garden, which was already overgrown, got out of control. The poor structural condition at the back of the house worsened. This part was connected to the neighboring house, and after receiving no response, eventually the neighbors contacted the Environment Agency out of fear for their own house. The Environment Agency came round, received no response at the door, and so called the police to assist with access. Inside, letters were piled up behind the door. A desk fan was oscillating. The daughter was found on the floor. Dead. Had been for quite some time. Investigators come in and start searching the house. Bills were on direct debits and had all been paid automatically. The inhabitants had been hoarders. The house took a very long time to sort through. Eventually, they realized they were missing someone. Where was the mother? They had to keep searching through the house, searching for any evidence of the mother, where she'd gone. In the bathroom, there was a huge pile of things on top of the bath. Mattresses, blankets, towels. Underneath all this, they found the mother's body, wrapped in a blanket, practically mummified, such that it was impossible to ascertain how long she'd been dead for. A girl in my town went missing and the cops just did nothing and refused to make an arrest despite the evidence. She had a shaky and very abusive relationship with her boyfriend. One night after they broke up again, he and his friend stopped by her in her parents' house, saying he wanted to talk to her in his car. She agreed and the three of them left. She hadn't been seen since, but her ex and his friend had been seen in town acting like nothing happened. The parents reported her missing and stated that their daughter's ex and his friend were last seen with her. The police didn't make an arrest and didn't investigate. It's been many years. I can't tell how long. I estimate about 4 years or more. Rumors spread like they always do. Rumors of her being sold as a sex slave. Rumors of her being murdered and either being buried somewhere or fed to pigs. No one knows what really happened, except the ex and his friend. This year the friend was found dead with a gunshot to the head. The bullet went straight through. If I remember correctly, it was ruled as a murder, but the rumor of suicide has been going around. Some say that the ex shot the friend because the friend was gonna snitch due to guilt. I think the ex is arrested now for the murder of his friend, but I could be wrong. There is a $2,000 reward for anyone who finds the missing girl. The family just wants closure. I remember seeing the father's truck covered in his daughter's picture trying to get the word out there. Cindy Tig Rivera, if you are reading this, your parents haven't given up. I still see your signs plastered all over town. They miss you so much. Many years ago, a house up the street from us burnt down. By the time firefighters got there, it was completely engulfed and a new home would have to end up being built. The man who lived there set it ablaze on purpose not long before going upstairs and shooting himself. Although his house was in complete destruction, with the fire yet to be put out, nobody expected him to be alive. This turned out to be true, but what they weren't expecting was that his body wasn't burned at all. The flames had avoided his body completely. It's unsolved because no one really knows why he killed himself or what the purpose was of burning down his house in the process. It's also a mystery as to how the fire didn't reach him. Dr. Man killed himself after setting his home on fire, with no one knowing why. Not exactly in my small town, but in the desert outside of it. In July of 2019, a man, age not listed, and his wife, 69 hectoseconds, decided to take a 2-mile hike in the Mojave Desert. This wasn't unusual for them as they frequently explored this area. According to the husband, on the way back to their camper from the hike, the husband stated that he stopped to take a photograph while his wife continued ahead to the camper. The husband then claimed that that was the last he saw of her. He arrived at the camper to find it still locked with his wife nowhere to be found. He searched the area for her before deciding to contact 911. The wife was wearing a bikini, a baseball cap, and hiking boots and didn't have any supplies or a cell phone on her at the time. At the time she went missing, temperatures in the area were exceeding 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 38 degrees Celsius. A search was launched and the husband was named a suspect in the disappearance of his wife. Approximately 18 months after her disappearance, her body was found deceased in the Mojave Desert near Essex, California. An autopsy was done, but the cause of death was not announced. The wife's family members suspect foul play in her disappearance and death. Here's a link to the full story. Sounds like something that happened in my town in Vermont a few years back. Little old lady was crossing an intersection downtown one evening, in the crosswalk, when she was struck and killed by a drunk driver. The drunk driver was a well-known local attorney. He waited until the next morning to turn himself in so he couldn't be tested for back. Used every dirty trick he had in the book to avoid jail time. Dragged the trial out for months. Tried to get it transferred to different districts, etc. Guess who never ended up going to prison? So, picture a time when all car doors and house doors were opened with a metal lock and key. Our community was in a forest park and was almost exclusively made up of Fed employees and their families. Maybe a few concessionaires and contractors. We're talking about a residential community of less than 200 people. Before webcams or ring cams were a thing and before Wi-Fi was possible, Come to think of it, it's still not possible, in this location. With that stage set, one morning, I go out to my work vehicle and groggily put my key in the door and meet resistance. Look down, there's sticky paper on the lock. My key pushed through it, but now I have sticky paper in the lock. Get out my pocket knife and clean it out, go about my day. Get a radio from my later that day, and the same thing happened to him. More people show up from our neighborhood and most of them had the exact same scenario. Okay, we think someone is playing a prank.